Hello everyone and welcome to round 2 of our July 1v1. This time we are featuring Fox, Blazing, and Dubin. Expensive food and water at the start. That could be quite interesting. Have to see how the carbon is. Carbon's looking a little weak all around. Not too great. Silicon also looking a bit weak. We do have machine shops at the colony, which is going to be a bit difficult to use, but with electronics starting high, you never know. Maybe we'll get to the point where they are going to be pretty important in this game. Aluminum also starting expensive. Iron is not. Iron possibly going to be what our players are looking to use. Steel also starting kind of moderate. Players are going to have to work out these maps pretty quickly and decide what's going to be the best way to go. Little bit of a difficult situation here. We do have a little water along with the iron and aluminum up in this corner. Iron aluminum always going to be nice for a fast start, which is usually quite important in a 1v1. We saw that in the last round, Blues was able to use his quick start to gain a massive advantage over his opponent and just immediately eliminate him from that game in day 4. Always a nice thing to see. Dubin is going to choose to go for Scavenger despite the slightly weak carbon this game. He also immediately jacks up the price on aluminum. Of course, Fox Blazing going after the expansive play. I'm actually a bit curious about why iron was selected here. I'm a bit surprised that Fox did not instead land in this aluminum patch just to grab up a significant amount of aluminum. It would have been pretty easy to just grab 50 aluminum, be adjacent to the aluminum, go ahead and ship in some iron. That's going to be okay. Iron started off pretty cheap, so you can just buy up the first round of iron you need even. Take aluminum, right, one aluminum tile, and then put down double steel mill. Having bought up all the iron you need, I think that might have been the better path for Fox Blazing to take, but we'll see how this one works out. Going the 1-1-1 opener can still be okay, but Dubin, I'd say, definitely off to a strong start this game. Already dropped Scavenger. He's going to have good access to money because of that expensive food and water that's available. Going to be interesting to see what he decides to do. He is going to go for the double farm, even on just the solo water pump. Food is so expensive, this should be okay. But this is going to start increasing water's price pretty dramatically, probably, as he will be consuming more water than he's pulling in once this second farm is online, and by a decent margin as well, once you count in his life support costs. Alright. Meanwhile, Fox has actually taken double aluminum. This is what I was talking about with going ahead and founding in the aluminum. Dubin had decided that aluminum was important. It would have actually been pretty easy to found and then sell all the aluminum immediately because you knew that Dubin had jacked the price up to $80 and just undercut him pretty simply and then start gathering in aluminum very quickly. Instead, Fox is left with a couple of very, very weak tiles because the price of aluminum was so artificial from what Dubin had done. Just definitely something to consider. It is worth noting, I'm a bit surprised that Dubin chose to go after this water location instead of this one that was next to his base, could have potentially been linked up. There is some slightly better adjacency available here, but it's always worth paying attention to the reduced fuel costs and potentially negated fuel costs of having territory very close to your headquarters. Fox has managed to get to HQ level 2. We are going to see a lot of steel coming down, no big surprise. The expansive player is going to want to get through upgrades very, very quickly, hoping to use this steel quite likely to go ahead and push to 3, be able to get down perhaps some geothermals, some geothermal plants, of course, in order to generate power. There is access to one pretty easily. Unfortunately, any others look a bit more difficult to get to. You got the one up in the corner, but then the others are all positioned very far away, much closer to Dubin, and with dynamite available in the game, that is definitely going to be a pretty big concern. Dubin has moved into plenty of water, bought plenty of claims so far this game, it would appear, and got all that food production going. So we can see that Dubin's set up in a very, very strong position, making plenty of money. That said, Fox has managed to push to HQ3 on the back of all that steel production, immediately claims geotherm, has managed to use water as well to go ahead and make some decent money, it would appear. Going to move into more water, but we are, of course, going to need to see power production out of both of our players at this point. Medium water tile near Dubin is up for auction. Even if Fox gets this, it's not actually going to be all that attractive. Dubin is going to be the one to take it for 10,000, it would appear. No big surprise there. That's going to be a pretty nice pickup for him, I would say. Just can easily throw down an inexpensive, in the form of, you know, being free water pump and just be able to make some decent money. Water should start coming down before long. as both players should be making a decent amount of it at this point, but for the time being, that'll still be useful, and of course long term it's always nice to have that claim available. Power still creeping up. Dubin does have a geotherm about halfway done. It is protected by a goon squad at this point. Fox in a very similar position though, because the geotherm was positioned so close to the base, and of course Fox, being expansive, has access to that fairly cheap geotherm and is making a ridiculous amount of steel on these 4 steel mills. That's not going to stay effective for all that long, and Fox is also just basically throwing away money by auto-selling iron at this point, but it is certainly something worth paying attention to. Fox is trying to use the steel to buy up enough glass to go ahead and push to an upgrade. You can see that's getting very expensive at this point. Very difficult to do. This is kind of the problem, but it does look like Fox has enough claims to go ahead and move into electrolysis reactors. That should allow Fox to go ahead and push to the upgrade. Meanwhile, Dubin has hit 4, is immediately moving into glass kilns, has great access to silicon. This is the great thing about this found location. All these resources were very close by. They aren't fantastic versions of these resources. We're not talking about high tiles and medium tiles even all the time. But this map doesn't have great versions of these resources, so in a lot of ways, it's the best of what's available on the map, and that's what makes it so strong, is, yeah, silicon is weak, it's just 2 low tiles, but where are you gonna find better, honestly, right? That's the thing about it. You always gotta look relative to the map. And so, relatively speaking, this is great silicon, and it's turning into some pretty great glass production for what's on the map. Even better is, Dubin has set himself up so that long term he'll be able to make electronics as well, which were shown that they were going to be valuable by these machine shops, and the starting high electronics price, definitely something to consider as we move into this late game. That'll also allow for easy transition into off-world markets, assuming those become valuable. Dubin also going ahead and starting with the black market advantage, has go ahead and hit Fox's electrolysis, and I imagine that's just going to continue. You can see that Fox struggling without these electrolysis reactors to actually push to HQ4, and this is what I was so concerned about, having that quadruple steel mill. You just sacrifice so much other production potentially by having the 4 steel mills that, yeah, you can push to 3 quickly and you can get there, and that's great, but the problem is you need to get to 4 at some point, and in this particular setup, you've only got 1 route to 4, and that's your electrolysis reactors. And if your opponent can continue to attack those and those alone and still keep you knocked out of the game, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Dubin goes ahead and takes a pretty expensive pleasure dome. It's going to take a long time for that to pay itself off, and right now it's actually just granting him a huge amount of debt in order to enable a small cash flow. Could be okay, but he is gaining a fairly large amount of debt right now in power costs alone. The electrolysis getting knocked out is kind of going to help with that, but it's still not what he's looking for. Still not going to be making money. And Fox still stuck back, chose to get aggressive instead of moving into additional electrolysis. You can actually see a transition out of steel into more electrolysis to try and make this push. Probably not a bad idea, but Fox has sacrificed a lot of the built-up glass in order to do this. That said, because Dubin had transitioned to glass production for quite some time, it's not going to be the end of the world, but they'll be looking to go ahead and buy that glass back up very quickly now that Dubin is done producing it. Boosted electrolysis reactors, that is going to be painful for Fox. Dubin going to be making a lot of money in that. You can see now that Fox is pushed up to 4, things are a little bit more even, but Dubin's still with a ridiculous amount of money relative to Fox, and carbon has been made very expensive by some of these transitions out of Dubin. It's going to make it hard for him to push to HQ5 properly, but it is going to provide him potentially a lot of money to work with in the short term if he wants to stay aggressive in the black market, and that's going to be something that he'll be looking to do constantly. You can see Fox attempting an adrenaline boost on electrolysis reactors, but Dubin goes ahead and shuts it down with that very simple power surge. Farms have come up, and that's going to actually connect up these water pumps from Fox, reducing some fuel costs. Getting access to immediate water is nice. Dubin can take the upgrade, but as we talked about earlier, the upgrade is quite expensive to go ahead and take. Glass is getting more expensive. Carbon is still very expensive. Still needs to buy 100 of that in order to push for the upgrade. So Dubin not really looking to do that just yet. Instead, he actually transitioned away from silicon and on into these greenhouse farms. Going to boost those out as well. A little bit risky against the storms, potentially. They could be used to great effect against some of this carbon and this food if it comes flying out in those large groups. However, I don't know if we're going to see that or not. Dubin's also gone ahead and knocked down that carbon price by selling off a fairly large amount of it at this point. No more money to be made there, but he's got it in his pocket. He's using it to make these transitions and move on into some electronics production. He's also bought up a fairly large amount of electronics, maybe hoping to trick Fox into moving into electronics while he tries to develop a stockpile and then knock the price down after the transition is made. We'll just have to see exactly how that works out long term. Food's still quite valuable. Dubin still with a very, very large stockpile of cash, perhaps trying to hide it a little bit. Fox, of course, is going to see that Dubin's about 70% of the way to the buyout. Likely going to be paying attention to that, not going to make any mistakes in terms of upgrading. We do see a transition into the electronics factories coming down right now. Fox has also, it's worth noting, transitioned back into steel. Going to be able to make sure that upgrades are not too expensive with that, and transitions are also not too expensive. Dubin goes ahead and buys into carbon quite dramatically. No big surprise there, because what that's going to do is make it so that Fox potentially has a hard time producing electronics. However, it does look like Fox had developed a bit of a stockpile of carbon in preparation for that sort of play. So things seem to have backfired on Dubin, and that leaves Fox with a very, very large stockpile of money. You always have to be careful making such a dramatic play like that. Make sure you've absolutely paid attention to what's happening, and I think that particular play may have turned this game on its head. Fox Blazing getting the undercut there. Dubin tried to get aggressive, didn't know all the details of what was happening with the market this game, and Fox just punishes for it, feeling safe in moving to HQ5 now, despite not having bought up all those shares. And so that's pretty disgusting. And that's going to work out very, very well for Fox Blazing here. Dubin has just, in such a high-risk play, has just resulted in this situation for Dubin. There was really no reason to make such a risky play. When you're that far ahead, you can continue to just get more ahead. And especially with a resource like carbon, whose price just goes up and down so quickly due to the vast quantities that are being tossed around all the time. It's just, oh, that's painful to see. I don't know of any other way to put it. That is painful to see. Now, Fox is in now this kind of strange situation where electronics aren't available, but Fox has just moved away from electronics. Doesn't really care. Is in fact choosing to move into a patent lab and some solar panels. I mean, those will pull in decent cash to pay down debt for the time being. Unlikely to have too huge of an impact long term, I suppose. Fox is also moving into a Pleasure Dome. Just going to make sure that Dubin is not the only one with access to that cash. Since both players are now HQ5, one of them is Expansive, one of them is Scavenger. The Pleasure Domes aren't too bad this game. You can see that tile for tile, they're going to be making quite a bit of money relative to almost anything else. It's only really the silicon and carbon tiles that seem to be keeping up for the time being. Perhaps this electrolysis, once it comes online, will start to compete. Obviously, the power prices are very expensive. And the nice thing about getting into the Pleasure Dome is that even though you're not really making a whole lot on it anymore, once you've got it online, you are cutting into the profits of your opponent, of course, keeping them from having that fantastic tile available, just making them money. It hurts to sacrifice a tile yourself in order to do that, but typically as an Expansive player, it is a sacrifice you should be willing to make, as you generally have access to more tiles than your opponent. Alright. Well, Dubin back in the lead in terms of cash, as Fox Blazing has committed so much of it into things like this patent lab, getting that constructed, getting these transitions done into solar panels, which is giving Dubin a fairly large amount of silicon, it seems. Fox does not have great silicon production. You can see just these two low tiles for 2 a second is not very much at all. Trying to make glass with it for the most part. Also has stuck on 100, so possibly looking at a transition on into an off-world market. And you can see that Dubin's control of these raw resources is still resulting in a pretty strong position for him. Both players have a fairly large amount of cash right now, but Dubin's managing to pull in quite a lot at the moment because of his control of carbon and silicon in particular. Water is also a bit in his favor in that he has a couple of mediums and a low for adjacency. And that's not too bad either. So these control of these 3 resources, and especially silicon and carbon, have really kept Dubin in this very solidly, and you can see that he's now looking to be at a pretty distinct advantage in a lot of ways, but does not have thinking machines. Fox Blazing has taken that away, and Dubin also doesn't seem to have any real late-game transition set except for this off-world market. He's going to be relying on that entirely. The problem is there is dynamite available and spies available this game. This off-world market is not defended yet, and so Fox Blazing might have an opportunity to get aggressive here. Unfortunately, having been using the black market for adrenaline boosts themselves, rather than going after Dubin, has resulted in this off-world market coming online. And this may be enough for Dubin to go ahead and push for this victory. He has hit the Goon Squad at this point, and so that's a really, really big deal. Without that Goon Squad, there was potentially going to be a problem, but because of that Scavenger black market cooldown, he does manage to get that online. And this off-world market, this is why the off-world market is so good in the late game, even in 1v1, if you can get it established. The patent lab just, yeah, thinking machines is great, but what are you defending with it? Carbon scrubbing is great, and that you can now make money on these electronics, but what about this adrenaline boosted off-world market from the Scavenger, which is just going to keep getting boosted time and time again? That is always something you're going to have to be watching out for. Dynamite gets caught, no surprise there. Fox knew that was going to be the case. With the spy down, that tile is going to be defended for a full minute at this point. Pleasure Dome gets knocked down. That's going to just boost Dubin's profits pretty dramatically here. And now Fox is looking to be in a really troublesome position. It's so dangerous to go for these optimization centers and these patent labs. You're just spreading out into a very long-term play, right? You're just planning for the game to go for another 5-10 minutes at this point when you're making these plays in order for them to pay off and be worth the investment that you've put into them. Whereas the off-world market, it takes some time to pay for itself, but typically only about 3 or 4 minutes, especially with those adrenaline boosts running. And then after that, that off-world market is pure profit, and you don't have to do anything to protect it except keep up with these goon squads once a minute to prevent your opponent from tearing through you. And so that's just going to be a lot of money over to Dubin. Definitely is making quite a lot off that off-world market at this point, and Dubin setting himself up where he's looking to be about halfway to what he needs to purchase his opponent at this point. If he sold everything down, he would be almost to that 50% mark. He needs 315 to finish this off. Currently, he's trading away quite a bit of cash, it looks like, in order to keep up in the black market, making sure he can keep his opponent's Pleasure Dome knocked down. That continues to gain him more money from his own Pleasure Dome. And on top of everything, Fox Blazing has dropped into D levels of debt. The off-world market is coming online, but that means it's been a rather large commitment of resources, had to transition away from that patent lab. It's going to need a few launches in order to actually start making money, and of course Fox Blazing is very, very far away from being able to kill Dubin at this point. Needs to buy 5 stock, and then the extra 5 chunk at the end. We're looking at probably about, I'm going to say $550,000 to $600,000 in order to get that purchase, whereas Dubin, he only needs about $100,000 more in order to finish this game off. On top of that, Fox not making huge amounts of money anywhere, it would seem. Chems are doing okay. Food is doing okay. That's all well and good, but this Pleasure Dome continues to stay online for Dubin, and he continues to have this off-world market. Dubin, though, looks like he got a little lax at some point, and that off-world market gets destroyed. That's a problem for him. As that off-world market, it's going to cost quite a bit to repair, and that thinking machines might actually come into play here this game. You can see that, let's see, repairing this off-world market, pretty expensive right now. 300 carbon, 50 glass, 50 electronics is a decent price to have to pay. And it's only Fox Blazing Pleasure Dome that keeps getting blown up. I'd say that's a pretty big mistake out of Dubin to let Fox Blazing get to the point where they're able to actually hit this off-world market. I said you got to keep committing to that goon squad. It's going to be very, very important to make your opponent keep buying that dynamite, make them keep throwing it into your goon squads, lets you keep blowing up the Pleasure Dome. Potentially, you could look to eventually pick up something like a power surge to drop onto the goon squad, and then potentially hit with the dynamite, because you know your opponent's going to have to keep trying to throw dynamite at you. It looks like Dubin has hit a little bit of a misstep, though. It is only a 40-second cooldown for the scavenger, but that's very, very different from the 30-second cooldown they used to have. I mean, all this said, Dubin's still looking to be in a pretty strong position in a lot of ways because he has so much of a lead right now. Only needs about 100,000 more to actually finish off his opponent. The problem is this Offworld market isn't launching. This Offworld market isn't repairing. And where's Dubin's cash really coming from right now? It's basically the Pleasure Dome. That's literally it. If we look, it's just this Pleasure Dome right now. Dubin can't afford and can't even pay down the debt necessarily in order to get to the black market in order to stay into this game. This Offworld market needed to be repaired. This was his advantage. This is where he was at, was his huge lead with this Offworld market. And I think it's a really huge problem that he's let it go at this point. Fox Blazing is moving into a second Offworld market, just trying to make this game go long. Every moment that goes on, Fox Blazing is gaining an advantage over Dubin at this point, because you can see this number is not moving very fast. 78 up to 80. It's just these raw resources coming in, and that's it. Water is decent, that's for sure. Food is decent, and that's well and good, but Fox Blazing, if they can keep up this water production, I don't know about the adrenaline boost on the Offworld market. I almost would have encouraged it on the water and maybe the food in order to stay in a strong position. Maybe scrap away from this optimization center, turn it into an electrolysis reactor would be okay. It is a bit pricey, but you're not using the optimization center at this point. This game is almost over and you know it. So you're going to need to, I don't know about using this optimization center. This is the thing. Right, you're spending chems. I doubt there's going to be enough time to actually use all of these, right? Is this game going to even go on for the extra 3 minutes that's necessary in order to complete these optimizations? I think this is a bit of a waste. You always got to watch out for these little edges when the game is starting to come down to the wire like this. And every single time Fox Blazing gets a purchase on this stock, you can see this number goes down. Dubin is getting further and further away from the buyout as Fox has been progressing through this game. And I think these missteps are going to potentially result in Dubin's loss, despite the potential massive advantages that he had. And so Fox, double defended Offworlds, getting boosted with thinking machines as well. Dubin's just stuck in the mud, doing almost nothing. The water is pulling in money, but most of it's being turned into fuel and oxygen, which is making a little money as well. But you can see overall, it's not a huge amount of cash coming in. Thought I could finish the game before Offworld repair became necessary. That was clearly not the case for Dubin, it would appear. I think the huge mistake was letting that Offworld get blown up in the first place. You can see the debt payments are also causing big problems. And Dubin, he's only 100,000 away from victory, right? But that's where he's been for the past, like, 5 minutes now. Is $100,000 away from the victory. Meanwhile, Fox Blazing is just getting closer and closer to closer. It's possible Dubin will still close this out, but the likelihood just keeps getting further and further away. Some of these farms are a little bit troublesome for Fox. This might be better served as a steel mill, or just steel mills in general. You can see I also don't like the fact that these metal mines are still active over here. These could be something else, even just like steel up in this corner to go with these metal mines here. This is why I hate going for the double aluminum, and I think that's been a very painful play for Fox all game. Dubin's still 92% of the way there. Does not need much more cash in order to clean this up. 474 is what he's looking for. He's at 444 now. Very, very, very close to finishing up this game. The question is he going to do it? These electrolysis reactors are burning money. The freeze finally came down onto the water pumps, which is definitely a good thing to see because that's the primary place where Dubin is making his money. Turns out that it's proving to be quite beneficial for him right now that his water pumps are split up, because that's literally the only place he's pulling in cash. Food isn't worth it. Electronics are still okay, and that's fine. But it's just this one little pump and these electronics factories trying to make the 4% that he needs. Let's see. Oh, and Dubin still has this launch set aside here. He's going to need to notice that and cancel it. Now, Fox Blazing's at the 100%. Is Fox going to realize and get the cancels down? That's all it is at this point. Are you going to cancel your off-world launches? Which players is going to do it first? Notice and get the job done. Oh, Fox got the sell. and got the game. That's pretty silly. That is a very silly game right there. Well, guys, I'd encourage people to watch that one a couple of times. Maybe get the replay after the tournament, something like that. That was a close one. Day 9, almost day 10 of a 1v1. Definitely important to look at. It does look like... See, you gotta watch out for things like this. Absolutely gotta be watching out for things like this. Look at how long Fox had that victory and how close Dubin was to snatching it away, right? Dubin was so close. And Fox, you gotta watch out. You gotta be willing to cancel these at the optimization center. You can't be using the optimization center when you're that close to the end of the game. That was probably a pretty big mistake. This could have been a tile producing resources. Now, of course, the electrolysis was losing money here. It's all these little things you need to clean up at the end of the game. Dubin had the same kind of thing going on. These were losing money for a while before they got turned off. Definitely a big deal. You gotta watch out for these things. Because we can see the game came down to 100% to 99%. 100% to 99%. So all these little edges, they really make a difference at the end of the game. You gotta be watching for when your resources turn non-profitable. You gotta be being absolutely careful with buildings like the optimization center. You gotta cancel out of these when you're looking to push to the end. Oh, man. It was good to cancel these off-world market launches. It's unfortunate for Dubin, perhaps, that I think the off-world launch might have been canceled right toward the end, and that's good. I'm not entirely sure because of the buyout on the AI, but that was a close one. It was a close one. Ah, man. There are actually potentially too many things to go back and analyze there. One of the biggest things is don't make high-risk plays when you don't know exactly what's going on. And don't necessarily make high-risk plays when you're just that far ahead. It's something we've seen players like Qubit do before. But that's because Qubit almost always knows exactly what's been happening in the market because he's been forcing it literally the entire time. You gotta be careful. You gotta be careful with things like that. Because I think Dubin realistically had the game, but there were two massive mistakes there, and one was not keeping the Goon Squad on the Offworld. 100% of the time, just buy that Goon Squad rather than staying aggressive with the Dynamite. And the other was that high-risk carbon play that let Fox pull back into the game. It was interesting. It was an interesting one. That said, we spent a lot of time in this game. I'm sure players are eager to get to the next round, so that's exactly what we're going to do.